Hey everybody, we are back and we are live with Riley Cross. Guys, Riley Cross is a high school language arts educator and mom of two tiny tornadoes, precious ones. In between dishes, diapers, and homework piles, she edits her sci-fi novel. She finished writing her first novel at 16 and encourages other young writers to follow their hearts. Join Riley for a discussion on world building and creating unforgettable settings for your novel. All right, Riley, take it away.
All right, thank you so much for that introduction. And hi, everyone. I'm so honored to be here. Jennifer is one of my favorite writers. So when she asked me to do this presentation, I was just, like I said, beyond honored. I want to share with you today some of the tips and tricks about building your world that I really wish I had learned as a young writer. You know, writing my first manuscript, I look back and I'm like, oh, but I mean, you know, in those pages, you really do see the beauty of your first attempts. And hopefully some of the techniques we're going to teach you today sort of gives you a jump start on really giving a finishing touch to your novel at a young age. And it works for, you know, writers who aren't just young too, because these are all things that we need to incorporate into our writing. So let's get started. If you guys want to connect with me, I have a website, Facebook. I'm really kind of obsessed with Twitter, so that's where you'll find me most of the time. I do weekly or daily like little writing tips and like little you know, motivational posts. So if you want to follow me, I would be thrilled to see you as on there. So let's get started with what we commonly know. Now, what I teach at the high school level when we are teaching how to write narratives to my high school students, we always talk about setting. And I think that's where a lot of us, we don't grow beyond the setting. We just describe the clouds and the scenery, and that's what it is. It's just a backdrop to our story. But let me tell you, if you want to build a world that is alive and vibrant and breathing and even meaningful, we've got to go beyond the surface, which is just that first layer, which is the setting. So that common phrase, a picture is worth 1,000 words, the picture is often in the writer's head. We picture this world so clearly. And then the funny thing is that when you get people to read it, they never picture the same thing that you're picturing in your mind. So unfortunately, we don't have 1,000 words to describe what's going on in this picture in our head of the world that we're creating in either our short stories or in our novels. We don't have that many words. We just simply don't. You will lose your reader's attention, especially in this sort of give me the story quickly sort of age. So what do? We're going to have to sort of sneak the building of our world into our writing like a mom who's hiding vegetables in her kids' food, like legit. I have to sneak that stuff in. So we're going to have to do the same thing to build our world. We're going to actually make the words that we do have to describe our setting count. And we're going to do it by hiding it into the other elements of a narrative. So if you are a young writer, you're very familiar with the idea of plot, conflict, theme, characterization. All of these elements can hide our world building. So we're going to get into that. We're going to get into the layers of building our world. We're going to sneak that word count in. Kind of gone are the days where you could spend pages describing the sunset as it fades on the hill. By the time the sun has faded, so has your reader's attention. So we've got to find a way to bring it in. A very powerful way to build your world is through dialogue. And what I love about dialogue as a tool for building your world is that it just feels so natural and organic. And as you're reading it, your reader is getting immersed into the world without feeling like anything is slowing down for them in the pacing. Now, writers use this trick quite often through dialogue, introducing the world around them. Hey, did you see that? Yeah, what was it? I don't know, it looked like, and then the writer describes the thing that they're about to introduce into their world, whether it's like a stormy cloud coming by, a tornado, whatever the case is, or a landmark in your city that's going to be central to your plot somehow. And readers don't really mind this little trick as long as you don't do one thing, and that's called info dump, where you just put a ton of information into the lines to the point that suddenly it no longer sounds like a natural conversation. So don't dump information and keep it sounding natural. In your world, your characters will see things quite often. And, to them, it's not new and exciting anymore. So they may make a comment on it, but it needs to be kept casual, as if, this is something they would normally say about a normal occurrence. Quite often, writers will use the technique of somebody new coming along, and you have to explain or introduce things to them. Over here, you'll see almost like a tour guide. And that's okay, as long as you keep it sounding like a natural conversation between the tour guide and the person learning about this world. Too much, and it will feel like an information dump. So just be cautious as you sort of sprinkle little bits and hints of your world into the dialogue. One of the ways dialogue can help you is through the use of foreshadowing. You're not going to describe something yet, but you want to drop a little hint into the dialogue. And I'm going to give you an example from my novel that I'm working on. So I was very excited to sort of unwrap the lines for you and put them in here in this presentation. So this is from my first chapter. Kiara is slated for honor classes in high school. Martin beams. Good, so she won't be offered a third function career like this place. Mother beamed at him. No, she's defying all the odds. Excuse me, I'm standing right here. Anyone care to explain? I placed my hands on my hips. So a couple things about these lines. What's in bold is my world building. In my world, I've got everyone sort of labeled by functions or sort of like you're put into that group, And this is a foreign concept to the world we live in now. We're not labeled by third function, first function, second function. So this is something I want to introduce to my readers, but I want it to feel organic. So I slip it into the conversation, but I don't necessarily explain it. And I know this will cause my readers just a little bit of confusion and a little bit of curiosity. So notice that the last line, I make sure that my main character talks about it too. Like, excuse me, I'm right here. Will you explain this to me? And by adding that little question in, I'm allowing my readers to feel connected to my main character. I'm confused a little bit as the reader, but so is the main character. All right, so we're going to learn about this together. And it kind of comes across in this very organic, naturally revealing way. And of course, I'm also using this as a little bit of a teaser because the third function doesn't really get described until a couple of paragraphs down, but it happens sort of at this slow little pace. But you can hint at it through the dialogue, and then when it's revealed a little bit more, it doesn't feel so much as an information dump as of a recall. I recall that being mentioned not too long ago, and it sort of just slides very easily into the story without it becoming a giant paragraph of information, which slows the pace of your reading. Another way to add world building into your writing is through a pop of color. I'm sort of obsessed with those photographs where they're all black and white, and then there's just like one particular object that has a brilliant flash of color, whether it's like a wedding photo and then the bride's holding a rose, and then that rose is a vibrant red, and it's the only color in the photo. What I love about this is it draws our eye to that one piece, and the same thing can be done in your writing. So, knowing that our readers will picture our world different than the way we've described it, they're going to sort of be filling it in like a coloring page with the elements that they know and that they're familiar with. So you want to provide like a basic framework. This is the room, but I'm not going to describe to you every detail of the room. The color of the wallpaper, the type of carpet on the floor, that'll sort of get filled in by the reader themselves. What helps is to have what I would call a grounding technique. And that sometimes that little pop of color is all that the reader needs to feel like they are rooted in that particular setting within that particular scene. Whether it's the iridescent blue on your main character's watch as he looks down, or it's, the vibrant golden hue of the sun as it warms your character. Whatever it is, picking that one little pop of color helps the reader stay grounded in that setting while they can fill in the rest mostly for themselves. I've also included a little excerpt here. He offered a handshake. I took it. Warm, pleasant, comfortable. Let's give you a tour of the building, Martin said, gesturing to the lobby's squared space, dotted with the occasional plant pod. The green plants only highlighted the gloom of the concrete flooring and painted brick walls. I only mention one color, and I do that strategically because I want the green suddenly to appear in your imagination. And then the rest sort of just organically flows, again, adding a pop of color. How often you might want to add this little pop of color, it could be once a page, once every 2 pages in your novel, or if you're writing a short story, just sort of pick certain objects, just like you would a photographer taking a photo. Which elements in this photo should I give the color to? Because the rest, again, can be filled in by the reader's imagination, but it just adds a little sparkle to your world. This, I think, is one of the most important tips to building your world. And although it's not necessarily connected to any one particular element of narrative, it's just a good old-fashioned tip, which is don't drop all of these gorgeous world-building details all at once. It sort of has this snowball effect where each element itself is gorgeous if looked at alone, but all together becomes this confusing mass of information. One thing that I do when I write is I make sure that I don't introduce more than 1 or 2 unfamiliar concepts per chapter. Another way to do this, if you're writing a shorter story, would be to pick 1 or 2 unfamiliar new concepts, especially if you're writing sci-fi and you've got all of these crazy ideas for inventions in your head. It takes a lot of time to explain each one on the level that your readers are going to grasp it. So you want to pick 1 or 2 and sort of root it into something familiar and comfortable. And so just picking and choosing, but not dumping all of the information at once. Let me tell you, it's so tempting in that first chapter of your novel to be like, all right, this is the world I've made. And let me tell you, they've got really, really cool laser guns, and we've got hovercraft, and we've got drones, and we've got all of this stuff. But it's too much for your reader. So you want to just gently slide in the information and then sort of drop hints, like little hints about upcoming technology that you want to add in. This also works if you're not writing sci-fi. Let's say you're writing just you're writing a romance or whatever the case might be. Adding in too many unfamiliar names, too many unfamiliar relationship details, drop them 1 or 2 at a time, per chapter, per page, whatever it is. Just drop the information in gently, and you're going to find that overall it's accepted much better by your reader. This can happen with, like I said, character names. Too many characters at once gets overwhelming, and their relationships to each other all at once is also overwhelming. I always admire books that have such a strong cast of like 6 or 8 more characters at a time, because to be able to build up each character and their relationship with each other, and then the reader understanding that relationship, it does take a lot of time and effort. And that's where we don't snowball the information. One of my other favorite tips and tricks would be to insert description into the action. And this can be done, it has to be done so delicately that it really becomes almost a skill. Fast pacing will allow for small details to stand out. If you're writing an action sequence, they're running for their lives, things are moving in the background, it's like an epic moment, it's a battlefield scene. Things are moving at a very rapid rate, and your reader is like into the moment. So any little detail you put in here will stand out. If your main character is tripping on rocks, and those rocks are made of a strange green hue, like there's something glowing or whatever, then the reader in the middle of that action sequence is going to be like, wait, why is the writer spending even a sentence describing the rocks on the ground? Are they important? We keep reading and find out. So any detail you put in here, it becomes very highlighted and it should become necessary to the action. And allow the setting to manipulate the action. One of a movie and a book, The Maze Runner, literally the setting defines the action. These mazes and the walls are closing in as the runners are trying to escape. So the setting manipulates the action itself, creating a vibrant world through movement. And the last thing is it gives importance to your surroundings without excessive detail. Because when you're writing it in the action, you have to be so cautious about what you pick to describe, because you don't want to be like, oh, they're running for their lives. Oh, but wait, the sun is shining and the branches are snapping. And in the corner, there's a bluebird singing so happily and peacefully. You're like, wait, go back to the action. You have to cut out the excessive detail and focus just on the one thing, the bird chirping ominously as you're running for your life. Now that one detail just shines, as opposed to burying it in a bunch of, or pausing the action and then dumping a bunch of setting in there. So action is a fantastic way to really build an authentic world with your reader. So here's an excerpt from my own novel. The tears came and then mingled with the ash on my cheeks. I glanced over his shoulder at the wreckage. Flying drones doused the remaining flames with water. A crew of fourth function workers sifted through the wreckage in oxygenated suits, pulling out the bodies and combing through the debris. I'm describing what she sees, but everything she sees is moving. There's drones moving. There's fourth function workers, which what are fourth function workers? We don't know. The questions are sort of logged in the back of our head, but somehow we can accept it. And we see these people pulling bodies out of the ash that's clearly all in the air. Did I need to spend a lot of time describing it? Absolutely not. You hide the detail into the action itself. Another really great tip here is that you want the do you see what I see tip. Asking beta readers to look at your work. Now, as a young writer, this can be very intimidating, the idea that you're going to ask someone to read. But I know I was nervous about it. I used to go to writing conferences. I was 16 years old, and to ask someone to see my novel, it was just everything, your heart on a plate. And let me tell you, I wish that I had just been a little more bold and said, here, read it. Because I need to have that boldness along with the confidence that if I don't like what my beta readers have to say, if I don't feel like what they're giving me is something I can use, I can very politely always say, thank you for your opinion. But then when I go home, I'm in control of what I keep, what I delete, and what I don't delete. But what I will say is that within every beta reader's opinion, there is this grain of truth that you could perhaps manipulate the scene just to make it a little bit clearer for the next reader. And that's the whole thing, is the clarity in building your world and in your setting is key, because what you see is not always what your beta readers will see. And so keeping that in mind. So be receptive to opinions and incorporate what you can in order to sort of closer bring the two visions together, your vision and what the reader sees. As long as they can be somewhat closely aligned, that's great. It's never going to be 100% aligned, because you want the reader to sort of fill it in like a coloring page. They need to be able to step into your world and feel like they can see it. And if you're manipulating every little detail, every little, freckle, every little, change of flooring that your characters are walking on, you'd be manipulating too much to the point it would be distracting from the story itself. So one thing that I love to use is Beta Books, which is free for your first 3 readers. You can upload your documents, your stories, and I just took a little screenshot of what I do with my novel, and I asked my beta readers for specific details. And number 4 says, do I need more description in this chapter? And if so, where does the story setting feel like it disappears in your mind? And I think this is really, really critical, because I've read books before where I feel like the story background is disappearing. It's just gone. Where am I? What room are we in? What color of clothing is the character wearing? I don't know. Like all of a sudden, it's like everything drains. And although the reader should be able to fill in some of those details themselves, that's why they need sort of a little bit of a grounding technique. They need one or two elements so that the rest comes into focus. And I really want to know, as my beta readers are going through here, is there any place where there's just too much talking and there's not enough background of where they are? Are you getting confused or lost in the story? And so this, to me, helps focus my beta readers, and it helps them know how to explain to me what they are seeing, so I can maybe match those two visions up. Getting rid of cliches, they've got to go. And oftentimes we don't even know that we're using them. I'm not saying that you can't use any cliches. There is sort of a comfort to the familiar. However, and there's also a little bit of danger in creating very weird and unusual similes and metaphors. So you've got to sort of create this balance between fresh and exciting ways to describe a scene and locating where you are using cliches. And sometimes things become a cliche, not because they are commonly used, but because you, the writer, have been commonly using those cliches. You may not even know it, but you may tend to focus your descriptions on one particular thing. One thing I've come to realize is that as the writer, I'm like really obsessed with where my characters, like what they're doing with their hands. What are they holding? Did they zip that? Did they unzip that? Did they turn off the light? Are their hands folded? If their hands were on their hip, now where are they? I don't know why. So for me, I have to dial back what I write, because I'm like, wait, maybe I'm just describing it too much, what they're doing or what, how they're holding this particular object. And you may focus on descriptions that are very similar in style. You may describe somebody and you have a particular favorite phrase that you have written, but that you use too much to describe people with. So you've got to be careful. Pro Writing Aid does have a free version for like your first, I think, upload or for your first so many words. I personally recommend buying it if you want to be practicing your writing and you want to have that editing tool at your fingertips. They have a feature called Echoes, which allows the document to show where you as the writer are repeating phrases too closely together. And that'll help cut down on the number of times you describe something the exact same way and with the exact same phrase. It also has cliches, and it'll search through your document looking for them. If you want to just do it yourself, then Microsoft Word has a feature where you could just search for keywords in your document. So you could take a piece of description that you have written, and you can get Control F and find that piece of description and see if you're using it again and again too many times. Or when you've finished writing, you go through with this editor's cap on and you look for ways that, phrases that you would be repeating. The easiest way to catch that you're repeating without a fancy program would be to read it out loud as if you're reading it to an audience of children who are sitting and listening at your feet, and you have to be exciting and dramatic. If you do it like that, you're going to catch a lot of places where you're repeating yourself. All right, so you're going to be sprinkling in your imagery, similes, and metaphors. And when we sprinkle those sort of descriptive sentences into our writing, it adds that beautiful burst of color, and it helps the readers understand the world that you're creating through the use of similes. Oh, this is like this, or the imagery allows your reader to see. So 2 sentences of my own here. I wonder sometimes if you can see your future in the sky. If so, what would it mean if a bright blue patch is gnawed upon by a storm cloud's hungry jaws? My gray eyes trailed the heavens as if the answer would reveal itself. Or the second one there, my indigo cotton suit fit over the rest of me, tunic, fit over the rest of me like a silk cocoon that promised one day. So 2 sentences here with some imagery. One has a simile. just sprinkling those into your writing, it creates just sort of a refreshing burst of color on the page, kind of like confetti. Another element where you can build your world is through characterization, through the characters themselves. So I'm thinking a lot of the Hunger Games, Katniss Everdeen. The world she grew up in, the world created by Suzanne Collins, you see that it affects her character development, who she is. The world is rough and cold and cruel, and so is Katniss. In some respects, she's sort of closed off to, she's just not like as warm and receptive. Like, that's not the world she's grown up in. She's had to be a survivor. So that's one way you can add setting and world building is through your characters. Make a list, sit down and think, in what ways would my world affect my character's mood, physical mind, their mentality, their mindset, their physical appearance. A world where the sun is beating down on the desert, and there's burning sand everywhere. You could describe that, or you can also describe that world through the dark, deepening tan in your characters, in their skin, or the dehydration, the thirst on their lips as they're drying out and they have no water. You can build the world through your character as well. It's almost like a reflection. Your character should mirror back elements of your world. And that's one way for you to bring your world more to life through your main character or other characters. You can also do this through unique characteristics in the setting. This is different from character. This is characteristics. So what oddities or details stand out most in this world? I'm going to again go back to the Hunger Games, where the mockingjay is a bird that, is commonly heard, but then becomes this beautiful symbol of freedom and rebellion. So what oddities or details? They could be ordinary details that somehow have been made significant. If you can make those details both symbolic and picturesque, in other words, they build a picture in the mind, they're these like little, again, bursts of color, you will have a very, it's a world that just sort of draws you in from beginning to end. Conflict is another layer to, a story, but it also can be used to include your setting. Your world's limitations, those unique features, can feed into the conflict. Let's imagine you have a city divided by political realms of thought. Well, you can create differences between this part of the city following this leader and this part of the city following someone else. And that can be just the way that the buildings are set up, the ragtag group of heroes versus those living in their mansions, sipping fine porcelain tea, that kind of thing. So you can create through your setting the meaningful impact of your conflict. I'm thinking of The Great Gatsby, how there's East Egg and West Egg, and in the middle, what connects them is this sort of dusty, crumbling place where the poor breathe, live, die, and work all day long, and the rich just zoom through without a care in the world. And even there's differences between East Egg and West Egg. One's old money and families with respect and power, and one's new money where people have maybe acquired their wealth through slightly less legal means. And there's just sort of this rich snobbery between the two settings. That, I think, to me, is the perfect example of how conflict between these various groups is illustrated, highlighted, and brought to life through the setting. So it's something for you to think about. What is my main conflict, right? This character versus this character, or whatever the conflict is. Now, how can I describe that through my setting? So I've got a couple hashtags that I use on Twitter quite often, RileyChallenges and Ignite Writing. You can follow them if you want. And these are some of the challenges that I have for you as my audience here today. So I'm thinking, you should try some microfiction. Microfiction is like this razor blade thin edge of a story. In 25 words, can you make a story? In 250 words, can you make a story? What about 500? Whatever microfiction challenge you decide to take on, consider using them for practice and world building. If you enter those sort of contests, not because maybe you want to win, although that would be nice, but you only use those contest prompts to feed your world, write everything about your main story. Everything should have a connection to your main story, because you may find in preparation for those contests, you come up with some amazing sentences that you can incorporate into your novel, and that it just sort of motivates you to think about it on a very microscopic level. So it allows you to practice with only a few words. Another thing would be to create a photo collage for visual inspiration. I love Instagram has, I believe, that feature. So does Pinterest, where you just take a group of 6 or more photos and you put them together in sort of like a square collage. And in those photos, you can bring out the elements of your world that are important. This picture really inspires me. This is what I believe my world would look like. This is what my character might look like. These are, this is the drone that's, in my story. Taking those little pictures and then putting them together, it not only motivates you, I would recommend printing it out, maybe hanging it somewhere where you can see as you're writing your story, because looking at those images or having those images in your mind is going to help you sort of focus your story. Another tip I didn't put on here is I keep a separate Word document for my descriptions, because I may forget how I described it, and I don't want there to be sort of this plot gap between how I described it in chapter 1 and then now all of a sudden it's changed in chapter 15. So anytime I describe a particular person, a place, an object, I try to put the name of the object in bold, and then I just copy and paste my descriptive lines underneath it. So later I can go through and be like, okay, the descriptions line up. I don't see any gap here. Or if I start noticing a discrepancy in how I'm describing it, I can always use Control F and go back and find that in Word. So collages, collecting your descriptions would be another good challenge or tip for you. For 3, editing or reading through your pages to look for world building opportunities. I'm going to say that no one is the master of building their world on the first attempt. You've got to sort of let that initial rush of words just flow through you. Write to your heart's content. Just bleed onto the paper. The important thing is that when you go back and edit, now you take that critical mindset of, how can I build this world a little bit further? How can I refine what I'm doing so that way I don't have pages and pages of description? So oftentimes a lot of these world building techniques, we can sort of try to incorporate them as we're writing our rough drafts, but a lot of that finesse and detail comes on the 2nd or 3rd or 4th round. And lastly, use competitions to explore backstories and explore or create a richness to your main story. I recently entered a microfiction competition, and I was wrestling with how my story might end. How do I want this story to end? There's the way that I thought it would originally end, and now I've got 4 or 5 other variations of that same ending. And I decided to explore, what if my main character makes the epic choice, an unexpected choice? What would happen to the world I've created? So then I set it 20 years in the future. This is someone who's survived or the aftermath of this decision. What is the world that's left behind for her? And I sort of explored the future consequence of my character's choice through a shorter piece. I'm going to tell you, it was so much fun. And I had so much fun doing it. That it did inspire the ending for my novel. So using those competitions to create a sort of, it helps you understand the character, their mental state, their psychological state at the time that they're making the decision. the impact of what happens if they make this decision. I just find using those competitions in this way is just such a powerful way of doing things. So I highly recommend that. So my takeaway points, hopefully this isn't repetitive, but layer setting through other narrative devices like, dialogue, conflict, characterization, pacing, figurative language. Take all of the elements that are familiar and essential to your story and find ways to mold mold them into also world building techniques. Foreshadow, hint at things that are about to come, especially new terms, relationship. You can build such great tension this way, and any features to come before introducing them, and just sort of pace it out. In my mind, when I planned out just a few elements that I'm going to introduce each chapter, that's when I could almost see it coming together myself. 3 is just be willing and ready to face beta readers. That is the best way for you to grow as a young writer. And your parents are probably your best supporters, and you definitely should have them read your stuff, but maybe venture out, ask your English teacher, ask, a writing friend, ask a couple of your peers. Try to venture out your realm of comfort until eventually you can open yourself up to beta readers that you trust, and you can learn from that experience. And lastly, edit once the initial creative process has finished. A lot of times people get hung up on the editing and, did I really, that world building technique was so great, let me go back and fix that. But you never get beyond the first chapter. You're so obsessed with making it perfect. Perfection is going to come much, much later. So just allow that initial rush of creativity before you go back and you fine tune your world. Some resources, Pro Writing Aid, which I checked today. There's a 25% off coupon. Not that I'm not making anything from pushing them. I'm just saying that they're pretty amazing. Another really amazing element is Furious Fiction, run by the Australian Writers Centre. It's free every month. They send you a prompt, and this is where you can maybe use some of those prompts as inspiration to create the backstories for your main novel or short story. Beta Books is also free, and you could share it with people, especially right now with the pandemic. This is a great way to be able to share a link with somebody that you may not necessarily see a whole lot and keep in contact with them. It's like an ebook. They can kind of read your book on their phone, and it reads like an ebook. Lastly, I'm so happy to be a part of this, that, young writers are watching. Email me at writingbyriley@gmail.com before Sunday, so tomorrow, midnight, and I will put you in a raffle chance. And I want to send you guys a notebook where you can detail your amazing ideas. Sometimes all we need is a nice notebook with that really cool cover to, sort of inspire ourselves to write. Take it outside, jot down a few thoughts as they come to you, that kind of thing. So, and I guess I'll end it with just, if you want to change your world, pick up your pen and write. Thank you.
Awesome. Yay, Riley. All right, guys, listen, I took pages of notes.
Oh my gosh.
Like, for real. I was screenshotting. We've got questions that are in the chat, so I want to go on and hit some of those. Sherry asked, how do you find beta readers for your work?
Oh, so I run a writing group. And so a lot of time, if you join a writing group, if you Facebook has a lot of them, Slack for the young people, you can use one of those to sort of collect readers. If you join a group that's already established, you could start forming relationships with writers. Going to writing conferences, you meet other people with like-minded interests. But I will say that Beta Books, I saw this the other day, you can connect with a community of beta readers. I'll just sort of caution this with a little warning, is that you do want to be careful who you share your work with. But I believe they have some sort of ranking system where you could see if someone would be willing, a stranger, so it's kind of scary, would be willing to read your work and give you an honest opinion. And they're just people who like to read and they like to beta read. So check into that. It might be an option for you. I find the best way for me is to really build relationships with groups online and then going from there. And sometimes within your own circle. Like if you know someone likes to read, why not ask them to read your book? You know, what's the worst they're going to say? So, check your own circle as well, people from different professions. My husband is a gamer, so he was playing Xbox one night and he's like, hey, you guys want to read my wife's book? And they're like, yeah, sure. So I've got gamers reading my sci-fi novel right now. So be open to some unexpected avenues.
All right, our next question, how do you take feedback from beta readers and understand how and what to incorporate or leave off?
So part of it, you got to trust your own writing instincts. Like they may say something that will so drastically change the course of your piece that you're just not willing, you can't go there. But like I said, there will always be a grain of truth. So why did they suggest this change? One of the harshest pieces, I think, of beta reading criticism that I got was that my first chapter of my novel was not the first chapter. And I was like, what? But my whole book starts from this point. And they're like, but we don't feel like it does. And I wrestled with this for about 2 to 3 weeks. Like, are they right? Am I right? Are they wrong? And what I came up with was, let me try it. If I write a new chapter that predates my first chapter and I love it, then I'll keep it. And if not, then I won't. What's the harm? I'm just adding another psychological element to my understanding of my characters. I wrote it, I loved it, and my story feels complete. So that was one that I wasn't sure if they were correct, but I explored it anyway.
All right, we got an absolutely love this presentation.
Oh,
yay. All right, so Anne asked, how do you compile feedback from beta readers? And then how do you get beta readers without spoilers?
Without spoilers? Well, I'm going to give you some news. Your beta readers sort of signed up for the spoilers. They're not like your initial readers. They're not the readers that you're going to be, presenting your book to once it's a final product. So, you can't really worry about spoiling the experience for them as much as you have to be worried about choosing people who are going to give you an honest opinion on your story. Beta books, again, that free version, you can have 3 people and it collects all of the comments from those 3 people into a separate side document. And you'd be like, oh, all right, this is what all 3 of them said about this chapter. Google Drive, if you allow comments, they can highlight lines in your story and they can leave a little comment. And what's really amazing about Google Drive is people can comment under that comment. Like someone would say, I really don't like this line. I feel like it doesn't feel genuine to the character. Underneath it, 2 other people, I agree as well. I mean, it sort of collects it for you if you use those technologies.
All right, so we had Allie. I took so many notes. Thank you, Riley.
I'm honored.
So last minute tips to share. One last minute tip about world building, finding your voice and setting.
Don't be afraid to just make crazy choices. Adding the unexpected. There have been so many times where my story, where I had it pictured one way, and then why not write yourself into a corner? I mean, really, you have a dangerous pit that they have to get across. Why not make the rope ladder break? Now what will they do? And as your character is like falling midair and you're like, why did I just do that to myself? Because the plan was to get them across. Ask yourself, well, what are some unique solutions to this? What else can we do? So sometimes throwing yourself a curveball is such a creative booster. Or asking other people, can you give me something random that I have to include in my next chapter? I love that. I got the challenge to add something red and something metallic or something, whatever, to my next chapter. And I didn't do that yet. But I love getting this sort of random curveball thrown in because you don't really know what doors that might open.
Oh, I love that. Love that advice and love everything you've shared today, Riley. Thank you so much for your time. Guys, I want to say, number one, follow Riley Cross. She is an amazing friend, leader in the writing community, and just a beautiful author. Did you not see those lines of this novel that she's finished? So congratulations to you, Riley, on your YA novel that I'm sure is going to bless so many people, including me. And I want to say, guys, don't go anywhere. Well, you got a few minutes for a break. But at 12 o'clock, we are going to be right back here with Amelia Griggs, and she is going to be sharing how to start that author journey from your idea to getting it published. So you do not want to miss that, but stay hydrated. Like, guys, go get some water, get some snacks, grab a lunch, and come back and join us. And we hope to see you then. All right. Thanks, guys.